So this then commenced a remarkable period of around 16 years in which you and your team were responsible for several discoveries, and some of which became mines. I'd like to discuss Oyu Tolgoi separately, but are there any of the others that you'd like to comment upon now?
Yes, there's a number of them actually. I'll start with South Korea because that's one I really like. In 1988, while I still had my consulting business, SCAP, which is a United Nations body that was based in Bangkok, used to produce country-specific resource volumes describing mineral deposits and geology. One of those was South Korea. And so, one time I was sitting down with Michael and we just acquired the SCAP volume for South Korea. And in there was mention of clay deposits, and the clay deposits were associated with alunite and pyrophyllite. So there was no record of any epithermal style mineralization in South Korea. However, we felt that there could be potential for epithermals, particularly given what looked to be descriptions of high sulfidation mineralization. So we did an...
And they hadn't analysed for gold?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. And this was quite surprising, as I'll allude to in a minute. So Michael and I decided to do an orientation trip in South Korea to go and see whether or not there was potential for epithermals. Michael went a couple of weeks ahead of me, and he visited some of the clay deposits. He also went to one of the operating gold mines right on the south central coast, a place called Tongyong. And he visited that, went underground and saw a classic intermediate sulfidation banded epithermal, manganese, rhodochrosite, silver gold deposit. So he told me on the phone, he said, yes, there's epithermals here. So I came up and then we went down to look at this. Absolutely, it was epithermal, classic. Then we started looking at some of the other clay deposits. One had a very brief indication of gold at a place called Songsan, which is the southwest. It was a clay pit. There was a Japanese record of maybe 0.5 gram to 1 gram in an old drill hole. So we went and looked at that. That was high sulfidation alteration. And then there was a very large hill right in the southwest part of the country called Ogmesan. You just took one look at this from driving kilometres away, and it's a feature that you just think, wow, that's really something. It was full of clay, silica and pyrite. So we sampled that extensively and got nothing. A couple of years later, we were continuing on with this program when we had time, and we again went back to the southwest, and we went to, there was a clay deposit on an island called Casado. So we hired a boat, and we were planning to circumnavigate the island and then land and try and find the clay. So as we approached the island, the south end of the island, we could see a very prominent, what looked to be a structural feature sticking out of the south coast. The closer we got to it, the more excited we got. It was a 17-metre wide classic coliform banded epithermal vein that had never had a chip off it. And so that was obviously an exciting observation. Unfortunately, it had a lighthouse sticking right on the top of it. However, Ivanhoe was eventually successful in acquiring the ground. But to get back to the discovery side of things, a few years later, Ivanhoe decided to do some aggressive exploration in South Korea, especially the southwest. And so we went back to Ogmesan, that very large hill with silica pyrite clay with nothing in it. So I said to the team at the time, okay, there's nothing here, but I wonder what's in the small hills around it. And so we set up a program just to actually physically prospect the small hills around Ogmesan. The person involved with that program, who led that program, was Malcolm Forbes. So within about a week, Malcolm had found an area that had float, coliform banded float on it. There was no workings. It was right next to a road, and was quite excited for the right reasons. So those samples went in for assay. Some of them came back multi-ounce. That was a hill called Moisan. Then later after that, Malcolm went across the rice fields to another small hill about 1 kilometre away. That was called Unsan. That had float that was going 4 to 6 grams on it. And so these were 2 virgin discoveries of epithermal systems with no records, not a chip off them. To cut a long story short, we drilled both of them, had some spectacular drill intercepts. Ivanhoe put Unsan into production with a small open pit and underground. Underground there was percent silver in the veins, so it was direct shipping, or it was put into drums and sent straight to a smelter. Then about that time was the discovery of the southwest zone at Oyu Tolgoi. So the emphasis, it was very hard to justify why we would be looking at these small things in South Korea when a giant is unfolding in Mongolia. So a decision was made to pull out of South Korea. But since that time, the Unsan mine was sold to the South Korean contractor, who then continued mining up until this day, has done very well. He opened up the Moisan mine underground, has done very well. He's acquired the Gasado deposit and has got a decline going down into that now. So in our South Korean program, we found 3 virgin epithermal systems that had absolutely zero record of gold or any work done on them.
And is that because there's no placer?
That's the main reason, because Korea has a long history of placer mining.
Yeah.
But what did surprise me was, given the Japanese long-time occupation of South Korea, that they missed that big vein on Gasado, because their main deposit up until the discovery of Hishikari was on Sado Island.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And it's very similar to Sado, actually.
Really? All right.
So that surprised me, but it just goes to show you that you can't assume that everything's been found by previous explorers. So that was a very interesting discovery that I was very pleased with in terms of the team effort. One that was close to my heart, back in northeast Kalimantan, is Seriung. I did a prospecting program, aerial prospecting program there with Chris Sennett, and we were flying along one of the lines, and in the middle of a swamp there was a hill sticking out, and so we went round the hill, and I could see white boulders at the base of this hill, and I thought, well, that's interesting, that needs to be followed up on the ground. And subsequently it was. Those white boulders turned out to be highly mineralised silicified diatreme breccias. Ivanhoe drilled it, we got some quite good holes, but at the time it was felt it wasn't big enough, and also it was when we were pulling out of Indonesia, so it wasn't followed up. Subsequently, J Resources followed it up, did more sampling, and now it's a large open pit gold mine.
They've removed the swamp, have they?
Well, they didn't really have to. It had negative stripping ratio because
Okay.
the hill was the ore body.
Right.
Yeah, I have photos of this.
Yeah.
It's quite impressive what they've done. So it's not big. I think it's probably 700,000-800,000 ounces at the end of the day, but it was all oxide, and they've done extremely well, and they're still mining it. Another one that comes to mind was in Myanmar. The program there was led by Andrew Mitchell, and he had a great team of local and expatriate geologists, and we had a block of ground over what was called the Slate Belt, which is south of Mandalay, and it's adjacent to the Saigang Fault. And so we had records of antimony and gold in sandstones in the northwest part of the block, so Andrew put a team in there. We found the workings. The occurrences were relatively small. On the eastern side of the block, we found skarns in limestones, gold bearing, a lot of artisanal mining, but relatively small. So continued to reduce the size of the block and kept prospecting south. Eventually the crews came across some highly mineralised quartz float in some of the streams. These were milky quartz veins, orogenic, book and ribbon type textures that were traced up to their source. Trenches were put in, and there were some spectacular grades in the trenches over a strike length of perhaps 1.5 kilometres. several parallel vein structures, as you might expect, classic orogenic style mineralisation. Some drilling was done, all positive. Then 11 kilometres of adits were put into this system at different levels, all positive, visible gold everywhere underground. Very nice deposit. Some trial mining was done between the levels, that was all positive. Submitted a mining plan to the government, and the government said, well, I'm sorry, but your exploration permit's expiring and we're not issuing you a mining permit. So after all that time and effort, it came to naught. And now it's being exploited on a grand scale by a Chinese group. So a great discovery, but unfortunately it didn't lead to anything for Ivanhoe.
Yeah, sad lesson, really.
Very, but that's the risk you take.
Yeah.
If you go into places where there is a political risk, the rewards are there, but the risk is also there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was quite disappointing. And finally was Merlin, which was the very high grade moly rhenium deposit that was found in the Cloncurry district. That was, I have to say, an accidental find, because we were drilling out the Mount Dore black shale hosted copper deposit, and we were about halfway through that program, and the project geologist was a Filipino who'd worked with us in many places, Florinho Lazo. So Floor's out logging the core one day, and he's seeing what he thinks is molybdenum. Because quite not easy to spot actually in a graphitic black shale. So he thought it was molybdenum, so some samples were put into the lab, and yes, it was, and one hole in particular had quite a lot. So we thought, well, that's interesting, we need to follow this up. So we sent samples in for not only molybdenum, but I thought there could be rhenium, which there was. And so the more drilling that was done on this, the more we found, and ultimately it was quite a nice molybdenum rhenium ore body. There were sections of the core that were 20% plus molybdenum over 5 to 7 metres, and hundreds of grams of rhenium.
I mean, this is 1 or 2 orders of magnitude greater than you normally find. So what caused those huge grades?
Oh, I think it's a unique deposit. There's no quartz at all with the molybdenum. In fact, we had at the time a PhD from James Cook, a Brazilian person, very, very nice guy, actually, very smart. He ended up doing his PhD on this, and I haven't yet seen the results, but it was a unique deposit. It was a serendipity discovery, but it just goes to show you that you have to keep an open mind. A lot of companies, I've noticed, a single commodity focus. So if you're looking for copper and come across nickel, then keep looking for copper.
But nobody has any indications yet as to why there's that enormous. I mean,
well, at first there were a number of theories.
It's very abnormal, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why it's unique, possibly.
Yeah.
Whatever focused those fluids.
But that's not known yet.
Well, I think Zhao figured it out.
Yeah.
But the theories at the time were it's some kind of weird IOCG, because we had a number of substantial IOCG systems in that area. Secondly, there was a granite not too far away, but there was no quartz with the moly, so that really didn't make sense. And then there's all the black shales. So I think Zhao's conclusion was, based on quite a lot of scientific research, that the source of the molybdenum and rhenium is actually the shale, and then there was some chemical reason why it was.
So we'll await Zhao's paper in economic geology.
Yes, I think it is going to be published, actually, if it's
Good.
not already.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, I haven't really followed it, to be honest, James, but yeah, it was substantially economic. It was.
Yeah, I just thought those grades were extraordinary.
Yeah, 15 million tonnes at something like 2.5% moly and several hundred ppm rhenium. It could have made a very nice ore body. But then Ivanhoe, Australia, had floated on the basis of Cloncurry. It was bought in receivership, if I remember rightly. When we looked at it, we bought it off the receivers for $4 million. Did quite a lot of drilling at Swan Elliott successfully, and then floated Ivanhoe, Australia for 125 million. So the Cloncurry story was a good one for Ivanhoe. Yeah. And then Later, Ivanhoe pulled out, and it was taken over by a Chinese group who delisted it, and now they own all those assets. After Ivanhoe was taken over by Rio Tinto, that is.